Comics are hard to get into. I don't care what fans think, it's significantly harder than most hobbies. If you want to watch a TV show, you either buy the show or you watch it on Netflix. Where do you start? Season 1, Episode 1. But let's say you want to start reading Batman comics. Where do you start? Yeah, that's not a super easy question to answer. Considering Detective Comics is reaching issue 1000, it's not really easy to understand where to start. So as this is the first in my series of how to start reading videos, I figured I'd briefly explain how comics work so that you know what you're getting into. Comic books are published monthly, meaning that one issue of a particular series is released every month. Usually each issue is just part of a larger story known as a story arc, and arcs are usually about anywhere from 3 to 12 issues long. Then these issues are collected in trade paperbacks, or trades as they're known. When you pick up a trade, you're usually picking up a complete story start to finish. And although you could go and buy the single issues that have the story, it's both more expensive and less convenient. So when we talk about buying comic books, people are usually talking about trade paperbacks. Now the next question is, which trade should I start reading? You see, comics don't just start with number 1 and then keep going all the way up to 1000. For example, the old Batman stories published back in the 1940s and 1960s are way different from the current Batman you're probably thinking about. If you remember the Batman back from the 1960s TV series with Adam West, he was really campy and weird and all this kind of stuff. And that's what Batman used to be like. You see, in comics, there's something that is known as canon. Canon is a term that's used in literature as well. You see, there's so many books out there that we can't really consider all of them important. The books that we consider the most important in the English language make up the literary canon. Catcher in the Rye, The Great Gatsby, and Jane Eyre are all taught in English classes because they're considered very important. For example, teachers normally don't teach Twilight in an English class. So in comics, the canon is what is included as the real stories, the ones that matter. Back when Batman made his first debut in Detective Comics number 27, he actually used guns and killed people. And this is obviously very different from the Batman we have today. So this story is considered non-canon. The canon in comics is made up of the many books the community has considered the best. For example, the canon Batman origin story is Batman Year One, written by Frank Miller in 1987. And obviously Batman was around all the way since 1943, but because Year One was so good, we consider it to be the true Batman origin story. When it comes to reading comics, I think the most important thing is to think of reading comics as putting together pieces of a puzzle. You probably aren't starting at the beginning, and you're probably not reading stuff in order either. And at the same time, there's probably 40 other books all taking place at the same time. There might be things you don't 100% understand, but the more you keep reading, the more you learn about the universe. For example, if you're reading Batman, there's 1,000 other things happening both inside and outside Gotham City. And this for me is one of the greatest aspects of comics. It's kind of like learning about history. Everything connects and sometimes even crosses over, and each story you read makes each other story even better. So there are 3 basic ways to start reading comics. The first way is for those of you who didn't like my puzzle analogy. The first way is to try and read a character from their origin to the present. And this is probably what many people expect when they first start reading comics, but in reality it's really hard to do. Comics aren't the same as a TV show, so it's hard to start at the beginning and then go on from there. There are so many different writers with different styles that it's hard to show the entire progression of a character. But if you wanted to, you could try to start from a character's origin and follow their start of heroism all the way to the present. This usually involves looking at book lists that show the character's story in chronological order. The second way is to read a particular writer's run. A run in comics basically just refers to a particular writer's duration on a book. Starting at someone's run is really nice because there's a clear beginning and a clear end. And of course, you're not getting a character's origin this way. All of the characters already sort of exist in the universe. So if you don't have a lot of background knowledge of the character, it can be a little harder to get into. However, for a character like Batman, you probably know enough about the character to jump in and understand what's going on. The third way is to just read many of the best stories about the character. For example, the first 3 Batman books I read were Batman Year One, Long Halloween, and Hush. And these books aren't in any sort of order, they're all just really good Batman stories. And this goes back to thinking about comics as putting together pieces of a puzzle. With each story you read, you're learning a little more about the greater universe. And this is the main way I recommend starting, because you get to start by reading the best stories the character has. But I'm going to give you examples of how to start reading Batman for all 3 ways of starting out. So if you like starting at the beginning, I recommend you start with Batman Year One. This story is the definitive Batman origin because it really is that good. It doesn't have any supervillains in it yet, it's just Batman taking on the corruption and the mobs in Gotham City. And this is almost as much a Jim Gordon story as it is a Batman story. But yeah, it's a really great way to learn about the character. In fact, this was my first Batman story, and it really got me to fall in love with the character. There's also Batman Zero Year, which came out years after Year One, and is meant to be a different origin for the Batman. I don't think the two have to exclude each other, though. If you assume they're taking place at around the same time, you can try and line things up, but they are very different stories. In Zero Year, the Riddler takes control of Gotham City, becoming Gotham's first supervillain. This is much more of a classic superhero-style story than Year One, So if that's more of what you're into, I recommend checking this out. After the events of Year 1, the next canon Batman story is The Man Who Laughs, the first canon appearance of the Joker. But this story is the first canon appearance of the Joker. This story isn't about his origin, considering the Joker doesn't really have one, and that's what's cool about him. But it's his first battle with the Dark Knight. After Man Who Laughs, I recommend moving on to Long Halloween and its sequel, Dark Victory. There's a bit of a time jump between Man Who Laughs and Long Halloween. By now, most of Gotham's villains have been set up. The story takes place over the course of 1 year. There's a killer in Gotham who's only killing members of the mob on holidays, so Batman, Jim Gordon, and Harvey Dent have to team up to find this killer. This is a great next step because it still uses a lot of the characters from Batman Year 1. It deals with Batman trying to take down the same mob that he fought in that story. This is a great noir detective-ish style story, and its sequel Dark Victory is just as good, if not better. So these few stories will give you a great start to Batman's origins. If you finish these and you're looking for what to read next, I recommend looking up a chronological reading list of what the Batman's done. So the next thing I can recommend is starting with a writer's run and reading the entire run. These are great because they're a complete story. If Batman comics were some big, giant TV series, one run would basically be a season of TV. The run I recommend you guys start with is Scott Snyder's run, which started with Batman #1 in the New 52 reboot. This run is super easy to collect as it starts with Batman Volume 1, The Court of Owls, and ends at Batman Volume 10. Super easy to collect. There's also probably some hardcover collections you can find that might be a little bit cheaper. As I mentioned, this run starts with the Court of Owls storyline. Basically, Batman's at the height of his career here, thinking he knows everything about Gotham City and about his parents' murder. But then he learns about a conspiracy involving the Court of Owls, an old Gotham superstition. But it turns out the court might be real, and Batman and Wayne Enterprises might have secretly been helping them grow in power for centuries. This run is full of great horror and detective moments. It really focuses in on the Batman. If you're a fan of the detective side of the Batman, I highly recommend you check out this run. Another run I recommend is Peter Tomasi's Batman and Robin, which is collected in Batman and Robin Volume 1, Born to Kill, all the way through Volume 7, Robin Rises. This run starts towards the end of Grant Morrison's run on Batman, and Morrison's run is another great Batman run, by the way, but you basically need a PhD in Batman to get the most out of it. But Morrison introduced the fourth big Robin, Damian Wayne. It turns out the Batman had a son with Talia al Ghul, and he's certainly his mother's child. Tomasi's run is really about the father and son relationship between Bruce and Damian. This run focuses a lot on the Bat family, which is another really important aspect of the character. You see, Snyder's run rarely uses characters like Robin, Nightwing, Batgirl, and the like, but Tomasi brings these characters front and center in his run. If you're interested in learning more about Batman and his allies, I highly recommend this book. In a similar vein, I also recommend James Tynion IV's Detective Comics run. It's collected in Detective Comics Volume 1, Rise of the Batman, through Volume 7, Batman Eternal. Not to be confused with the series Batman Eternal, which the story takes its name from. This run also features the Bat family very heavily. It's basically about the Batman forming a new team of heroes in Gotham to take on the problems he can't handle by himself. The team, however, is made up of a lot of lesser-known members of the Bat family. Tim Drake, who's the third Robin, Batwoman, Spoiler. Not like I'm saying they're spoilers or anything. No, her name is literally Spoiler. Cassandra Cain, Azrael, Batwing, and even Clayface are all on this team. This run definitely has more of an epic feel to it, while Tomasi's run is more about the character moments. Then there's the third way of reading comics, which is just picking up a bunch of the best Batman stories. And for me, Year 1 and Long Halloween are also great includes on this list. But I want to give you a list of some of the other greatest Batman stories that I would recommend. The first is Batman Hush. There's a new villain in Gotham City. His name is Hush, by the way, and he's using the rest of Batman's villains as pawns. The story is great because it's a crash course into Batman's characters. You meet basically every hero and villain in the story, making it a great place to start. If you're looking for more of like a greatest hits kind of story, this is the one for you. Then there's The Killing Joke, which is the Joker story. It's a short story, but this is the story that every Joker story ever is built on. The story was originally supposed to be non-canon, but it ended up being so good that DC decided to include it in the main universe. So if you're a fan of the Joker and want to read the greatest Joker story of all time, this is the one for you. Another definitive Batman story is The Dark Knight Returns. The story isn't canon, but it's so good. It's written by Frank Miller, who also wrote Batman Year 1. This story follows the Dark Knight after he's retired, but he can't stand the crime in his city. So now he's back for one last run, ready to end crime in Gotham once and for all. This is the story that really changed Batman's perception from the 1960s campy Batman into the Batman that we all know today. If you're looking for a more dark and gritty Batman story, this is one of the best. Other great Batman stories include Nightfall, which is the first appearance of Bane, Under the Red Hood, which is one of my favorite Batman stories of all time. They also made an animated movie that's somehow better than the book, Arkham Asylum, which is a super stylized horror story, and The Black Mirror, which takes place when Nightwing actually took up the mantle as Batman for some time. I know there's plenty of great Batman stories that I missed, but these are a great start. I hope you kind of understand a little more about how comics work now. I know plenty of people who really like the Dark Knight or the Arkham games, but they just don't know how to get into comics. I myself got hooked on Arkham City and decided to learn more by picking up some of the comics. Comic books are definitely not the easiest hobby to get into, but it really is a great hobby. The more and more you read, the better the stories get. And hey, at the very worst, you pick up a comic and you don't like it. It's not the end of the world. Except most comic stories are about the end of the world anyway. Just read a Batman comic. You won't regret it. Probably.